Welcome back to Developing Games for Unity. I am David Crook. You can reach me on Twitter at DavidCrook1988. I'm a technical evangelist for Microsoft. I focus on gaming, cloud development operations. I'm huge on idea to delivery. Based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, ALM Ranger. I did development operations consulting at Fortune 100 companies. And you can see my contact information on the slide below. You can reach me at indiedevspot.com and also on Twitter at DavidCrook1988. And this is Dave Voiles again. You guys should be pretty familiar with him at this point. There we go. There's his slide.
So my second time back. I was here yesterday for a few of the courses, and now my first time back today, again with David Crook. So like David mentioned, we're going to be going over ALM, or Application Lifecycle Management. But Dave, you had mentioned before that you were an ALM Ranger, which sounds way cooler than my last job, which was just simply an engineer. So why don't you take a minute and explain what an ALM Ranger actually is?
So an ALM Ranger, it's not really a job title. It's just occasionally we would do work on the side to produce documentation for how do you actually do branching and merging, how do you do source control, what is this TFS thing? So we'd find gaps in what's going on in the enterprise coding as far as process management and running actual source control, and we'd write the documentation for that.
Okay. So it sounds like you're the perfect person to kind of ask about this and have really a lot of hands-on experience for what we're about to go over.
About 3.5 years in the enterprise doing this, and it's just been a huge experience, and it's great to take that experience and apply it to video games.
Perfect.
So again, this is Module 7, ALM for Unity, and that's going to be exactly what we're talking about. Module overview, the first thing is, what is ALM? I've heard a lot of questions. Application Lifecycle Management. Oh, do you mean my game's paused? No, that is not what we're talking about. Second is, what is TFS? Project management, source control, and general development workflow.
Okay.
So the first thing is, what is ALM? There's a lot of things out there about what ALM actually is. There's release management, there's testing, your development process, version control, but at the end of the day, it's really project management. It's how do I build an application and how do I release that application? It's the whole end-to-end process.
So it looks like there are a lot of people consider it to be a lot of things, but really we're going to be very specific about what we're going to be covering today.
Yeah, we're going to cover the main key points, which will be version control, project management, and we're also going to talk about the actual development process and show some of the tools that I use in my day-to-day development on how we actually go about doing that.
Okay, so I guess project management could cover quite a few different things, right? But it seems to be similar regardless of what field you're working in. So why don't you go over what project management entails exactly?
Yeah, so before we get into project management, I want to talk about Team Foundation Server. This is what I use to manage my projects entirely. Team Foundation Server is the Microsoft suite for doing ALM and project management, source control. I like Visual Studio Online. I check everything into visualstudio.com. I don't always work with the same people, and when I do work with people, it's usually all over the place. I've got, well, you in Philadelphia.
Right, we both work remotely.
Yeah, so it's really great to use Visual Studio Online. People can get access to the tools everywhere. It's all about teams, project management, source control. There's builds, coded UI tests, just tons of stuff. So that's really the tool that I like to use for this. And project management. So what is project management? Why is this so important? Well, it really helps you with the high-level goals of what you're trying to achieve. What kind of game are we building? What are the features of that game? How do we break down those features into tasks? What are the timelines that we're trying to execute this on? I've got an entire workforce that's working on this. I've got artists, I've got coders, I've got maybe a puppet. I have a puppeteer. Yeah, I actually have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I got to see how they're actually executing against this plan and what our resource usage looks like. Are we actually using these people the way that we mean to, and are they performing their tasks on time?
Okay, so it sounds like a great way of just communicating and making sure that everyone on the team is on the same page, regardless of how large or small your team may be.
Exactly. Yeah, I've worked on teams where a couple of our enterprise clients have over 2,000 developers, and organizing that many developers simultaneously is a bit of a challenge. And this is actually the tool that we use to do that. So at the beginning of project management, we usually do every day is a stand-up meeting. You know, you walk into a room and it's, what do we have to do? And we facilitate this with what's called the board. So we do our stand-up meetings, we work together, do our tasks, close them out, and go home. The board is the perfect place to do this. Over the past couple of days, I've started putting together a sample project to kind of show what this looks like, specifically for games. And we'll do a quick demo on what that actually looks like.
All right, so Eric's going to show us the board and what it looks like to visualize these communications.
So this is Visual Studio Online. This is the home page that you get. When I want to do anything that's work-specific, you have a little tab at the top that says Work. That's where you want to go to see what's going on with your work.
Okay.
So when I come over to work, you get backlogs, queries. I can see what my backlog items are, but you'll see this little note that says Board. If I click on Sprint 1, this is the current iteration of work that we're doing, and I can see the backlog again specifically for what we're trying to do with this game during this sprint.
Okay, how would you define a sprint? Is a sprint like one day or several weeks?
So to really break it down, you've got a release which is formed of a couple of sprints. And those sprints are anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks long. I do a lot of side projects, so my sprints I try to keep 3 weeks long because I'm usually doing part-time work, maybe an hour or two a day. And trying to break into the industry can be really tough, so I always try to do about 3-week sprints for that.
Kind of pace yourself along the way.
Exactly, and that allows my team to have a fair amount of leeway. And if you can see, you know, this is a really cool feature for looking at a typical sprint. You can see between 9-1 and 9-5, we did absolutely zero work.
Yeah.
So having those 3 weeks really helps you take a look at how you're doing and executing against your tasks and say, oh gosh, it's 9-5. I really need to execute some work. So it looks like on 9-5 we got a fair amount done, and we're back on track again.
A great way to track progress and make sure that, again, everyone's on the same page. We're constantly communicating. And so it doesn't just fall on the hands of one person. Instead, it's the entire team who's commonly looking at this board to make sure that they're all working on the same projects at the same time.
Exactly. And when we want to do these stand-up meetings, the first thing that we'll do is we'll all get together online. We'll use Link Online or Skype or some sort of tool like that.
Yeah.
And we'll pull up this board that you can see on my screen. And you can see that I've got a couple of backlog items. We've got build the main character assets. We've got design the input. And then we actually have to go and build this input. And you can see we've got about 21 hours to do. The in progress is kind of scary right now. We don't have anything in progress, probably because we're out here recording.
Yeah.
And then on the done, you can see what we've completed in this sprint. So this first meeting will come in each day and we'll say, okay, what do you got to do? What's done? What's in progress? What's your status? Do you rely on anything that I've got going on?
Okay, basically dependencies.
Exactly. So one of these guys, RN, he's one of my friends that's working on this project with me. He's going to be doing a lot of the art assets. But we ended up having to reallocate drawing the main character, so he's going to be blocked on smooth move. So when we go and have these actual discussions, he's supposed to do the animation, but the main character hasn't been drawn. So these are the meetings where you discover those kinds of problems.
Right. This way you can kind of stop it before it becomes a problem, right? You can say, I've noticed you haven't worked on this in a couple of days, so should I be working on something else in the meantime? Exactly.
It helps you really tune your resource allocation. That's definitely very critical. So that's kind of the overview of what the board looks like. Let me get to the correct slide deck presentation here.
Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like this could save people a lot of trouble just by being organized with these projects, a lot of communication back and forth. And how do we get these board items on there? Are these things that you and I are both agreeing on at the same time, or?
So that's actually the next topic. So what we want to talk about next is actually putting items onto this board. We've got features, product backlog items, tasks, timelines, team capacity, burn down. We've said a lot of these words already, but let's start talking about what some of these actually are and put some of these in here. There's some new features. This is a brand new game that I'm working on, so there's a lot of features that need to be added. So we're going to do all this live here. So let's start by talking about what is a feature. A feature could be, I've got a slow time component to my game. This particular game has a slow time. It's really, really buggy, so I haven't actually added it as a feature onto this game yet. And there's a lot of components that make up this slow time feature. There's graphical components, there's code components, there's management components. Those would all be product backlog items. So I could say that the time bar for, when we click the slow time button, that's going to start a timer and the bar is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, there's art assets and there's coding that goes into that. So the time bar would be the product backlog item. And the task itself would be somebody's got to draw the time bar, somebody's got to code the time bar, somebody's got to put the time bar into the game, and then they got to put it in all the levels. So that would be the actual individual tasks.
So a term I commonly hear for this is something like a story. How would you relate a story to a feature?
So a story would be like, as a user, I want to do whatever. As a user, I want to be able to slow time in my game. So I map features directly to stories, and then I break those stories down into product backlog items and tasks.
Perfect.
So to actually go about doing this, we're going to switch the screen back over to this board, and we're going to click on this little button here that says Features at the top. So when we click on this and we see all the features, we can see I've got a main character and I've got input for the game. This is kind of
pretty broad.
Yeah, pretty broad for the features.
Sounds like we may have to break it down into smaller things at some point.
Exactly. So we're going to click on the backlog and make sure that you're on this backlog view. And you want this view here to show features. This will give you a little field right here under New, Type of Feature, and you can just go ahead and type a title. So we talked about slow time for our game, so we're just going to go ahead and say slow time. This is going to be our new feature. We're going to click Add. And it's going to show up automatically onto this little list down here. This shows us all the features in my game. So if I double-click this, I can get more information about this. Who is actually going to be responsible for this feature? I don't like being responsible for things, so I'm going to give it to you.
Perfect.
Mr. Dave Voiles. And I think this needs to be completed. Remember, we were talking about releases and sprints?
Yes.
On the current iteration, you can see our project is Jack Round. We're in release 1 because this is a brand new project. We're going to push out our first release. We're actually in the initial sprint of this project. I think slow time is a big priority for us. We're going to put that as priority 1.
All right. Yeah, we don't want to fall behind at this point.
No, we're already pretty far behind from the looks of it. So I'll go ahead and click Save. So that's going to have our feature in there, but it's not going to show up on our board yet. We need to actually make sure that this shows up on our board. And there's a little button here that says New Linked Work Item. So we talked about having these product backlog items that map to it. So I think we need to have a new product backlog item for the art assets for our game. So we click that little button. It says we're going to create a new child of feature. So link type child. And we're going to change this from task to product backlog item. And we're going to set this to art assets for slow time. And comment, we're going to need, we need a time bar. We need some cool filler and some animations.
So if we're going to tie this back to Unity, I guess you could say this is almost like having components attached to our game object.
Yeah, you could say that. This could be multiple game objects that need to get created. You could have multiple prefabs, the art assets. I'd probably create a whole nother product backlog item for tying it all together. That might be a task, but bringing it into the game itself might warrant a whole product backlog item. So art assets for slow time. This probably won't be you. I don't really trust your art skills.
I'm a programmer. I wouldn't trust them either.
I'm going to give this to RN since he's our resident artist and animator. So one of the really important things to tell him about this is when I assign a product backlog item to one of the people in my studio, I need to give them a little bit more of a description. They're going to end up being responsible for a lot of their own tasks, especially if it's going to the art department. I might just give an art asset assignment over to whoever's responsible for the art and let them break down the task. I have no idea what art assets are going to go into that.
Right.
I'm going to give them a direction. I'm going to say, make it disco-ish because it's a disco-type game. You know, we need a border. We need a filler. Some animations might be cool, and a few particle effects. And I'm just going to let that go off to them and let them come up with their concepts.
Yeah.
And they'll come back to me with some concepts, and we'll kind of break it out from there. And then our next day, we'll have a meeting about it or stand-up where we're talking about the board. And I'll say, yeah, we went through this, and we're going to allocate some more stuff.
It's a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth.
Exactly. So we'll go ahead and save that. And for a minute, I'm going to pretend that I'm RN. You know, I'm going to come and I'm going to look at this. And let's just close all of these out and go to our backlog items.
Okay.
And I'm going to see art assets for slow time. I'll be able to see this when I'm looking. I'll click on this and say, hey, that's new. What's going on here? Oh, this is assigned to me. I should probably do something with this. So he'll go ahead and click the new linked work item and start adding some tasks. So the first thing, I think this is really important, is just research and read.
Yeah.
That's going to be my number one. If I don't know what's really going on, I'm going to start assigning tasks to myself for research and read about it. He says, what is a disco? RN, I don't know if you know about him, but he doesn't speak English too well.
Okay.
And he'll come to me and say, what's a disco? And I have to explain to him, like, oh, you got the disco balls and the lights and the
music
and the grooving going on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I'm glad you decided to point out research and read, because I'm sure you've seen this before. People will often not allocate time to doing their research in the background, right? So you don't want your boss to think you're idle or you're not doing something, but in fact you are trying to get up to speed, make sure you are all on the same page.
Yeah. A lot of times what will happen when you're creating a project is that you'll just go in and you'll type out, oh, we just need particle effects and it needs to look like a disco. Yeah. And you say, well, what kind of particle effects? You know, how many particle effects?
Or you may not be familiar with the tool or the asset or the extension that you're using at that point.
Yeah. Would it make more sense to buy particle effects perhaps? Maybe we should look to see what particle effects are out there. You know, that Cartoon FX2 out there was on sale for $5 the other day on the asset store.
Particle Playground, I use that pretty commonly.
Exactly.
So, you know, that's a very good point. You know, maybe our time is better spent researching better assets or tools to use instead of writing our own.
Exactly. So if we take a look back at my screen, what it'll do is probably say, well, that's going to be about 2 hours, and we're going to go ahead and save and close that. Notice that our iteration is still jack round, release 1, sprint 1. So when we close this out and we go take a look at the board and we click on sprint 1,
okay,
we'll go see that RN down here, he has build main character assets. There's design input, build input, but now we have art assets for slow time. Research and read assigned to RN.
Okay.
So he can go and he can say, okay, well, we're going to mark that as in progress during our meeting.
Yep.
Once that's going to be completed, he's going to go and he's going to mark that as done.
Okay, and I see in the top right corner there, can you highlight that real quick where it says September 1st?
Our burn down.
Yes.
This is, so we talked about this a little bit more. When you create these tasks and these work items, they're going to go into this. So that 2 that we allocated, I have started doing actual hours. You can do pizzas, you can do shirt sizes. This actually operates off of a number. You can see that for the entire sprint, we have about 40 work hours allocated for this.
And our sprint is from the 1st on the bottom left corner there over to the 19th.
Exactly.
Correct?
So by the 19th, we should be done with this sprint.
Yes.
I also like to think of a sprint as an entire section, almost like a deliverable that I can showcase to whoever my managers are or whoever my
client or funding or something.
Exactly. If I got angel funding, I'm going to show them this. I'm going to say, look, we're perfectly on time.
Right.
And then they can go and dive in and look and see what's going on. It's a great visibility tool.
Especially for like building confidence for a team or a product itself.
Exactly. So that's going to be the burn down chart, and it's going to relate directly to what we have on the screen as far as the board and how many hours we have allocated. Something else that we'll do in these stand-up meetings is once he's marked this as done the day before, we'll go back in and say, okay, well, we did some research, we did some reading, and it turns out that you need to design some new input because, you know, your input mechanism is just not up to par with what we want to do. So I'm going to cancel this out real quick so we can see it. There's this little green button next to this product backlog item. You can click that from within your board and instantly add a new one. If you look at this links, its parent is going to be the design input. And Ruben could have come back and told me during this meeting saying, hey man, you really need to design some new input. We need a slow time button. We can't slow time if we don't have a button for slowing time.
So who's programming our inputs, right? We have to speak to that person as well.
Exactly. So we're going to go and say, you need to build button. And we'll probably say build slow time button.
Okay, be a little more descriptive.
Exactly. And I'll just say do work to build button.
And this is just open to anybody at this point.
Yeah, so this one not assigned to anybody. This is usually my work area, so I'll go ahead and assign that to myself. We'll save and close that, and when I get back, probably next week, I'll go look at that and start building the slow time button.
Right, and I can see in the bottom right corner there of that actual item, it has the person who's actually assigned to.
Exactly. Great visibility for seeing who on your team is doing some work and who's not doing some work.
Okay.
Some other really good things to look at are this capacity. You know, a lot of times you'll go in and you'll start building this project and you've got this fantastic idea. You want to make like the next MMORPG. You want to have 50 swords and 20 variations of each sword. Yeah.
So I think we can make the next, World of Warcraft or MMO. What do you think?
I think we've got it. But hold on, let's type in our capacity per day. How much do you think you can work on this per day?
Pretty busy at this point, so I've got maybe an hour and a half at most.
You've got 1 hour per day. What kind of activities can you do this on? Can you do the deployments? Can you do the design, the development? Are you going to document it for us?
You know what? I'm not much of a writer, so maybe I'll just do the development. I like to.
We'll just do the development? Okay, so we'll mark you down for development. Okay, how many days off are you going to take next week?
Well, I'm a Monday through Friday guy, so yeah, let's do 5 days. I'll do 2 days off.
You'll do 2 days off. So we'll mark you for Thursday, and we'll mark you for Friday, too. Okay, so that means during the entire sprint, you can do 6 hours worth of work.
So I'm not making the next WoW.
Yeah, how you feeling about World of Warcraft these days?
Yeah, maybe I'm getting a little ambitious here.
Yeah, let's take a look. So Voiles I added into this project just for a showcase. You can take a look at our actual allocations of the 2 people on the team. I'm allocated at exactly 8 out of 8 hours for the rest of this sprint.
So you're kind of maxed out at this point.
I'm right on par with what I should be. My buddy Ruman, though, I guess he was thinking that we would build a nice big MMO for us. So
he's kind of picking up from my slack.
Yeah, 13 hours out of 4 hours available. I don't think he's getting that done anymore.
Yeah.
So, I think our next meeting on Monday, we're going to take a look at either hiring somebody else.
Or cut back a little bit.
Probably cut a few features. That might actually end up happening.
I like that's color-coded in red on the right-hand side, too.
Yeah, this says, oh no, you've done something wrong. You need to go and look at your work allocation. So, like I say, in project management built into Visual Studio Online, absolutely fantastic for getting an idea of how much work you actually can do, as well as tracking that work.
Yeah. And like you said before, it scales very well because you're at Fortune 100 companies with 200 plus or 2,000 people on a team. We have a team now of just 4 people, and this tool is equally as practical then.
Exactly. It's exactly what we use in the enterprise, big projects, small projects. I do this for personal projects. There's a guy named Brian Harry. I don't know if you guys know him, but I was talking to him on email one day, and he said he runs his farm with this thing. So he's
not just for technology then.
Not just for technology. You can manage just about anything. I mean, it's a great just project management tool that just happens to have a lot of really good software-specific features to it.
Okay, and this is built in or an added feature of BizSpark as well.
Yeah, so that tool is completely free to use also, so you just need a live ID. You go and log on with your live ID. If you're an enterprise customer, you can use your domain credentials as well. I know at Microsoft we have our own projects that we do, and I use my domain credentials to log into our own TFS. So,
as do I.
Yeah, it's and we do it on Visual Studio Online for some of these too. So I think we've covered quite a bit about project management. I think what a lot of people out there want to know, though, is source control.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about source control?
So what is source control? I hear this term all the time, especially used by programmers, and I'm just so confused by it.
Source control, well, I'll tell you one thing. It's not just making a zip file on a thumb drive and sharing it around the office.
So you're saying like my Dropbox or SkyDrive, those are not source control?
No, that is not source control. You can't right-click and view the history. You can't undo your changes. You can't branch. You can't merge. There's so many features that are just missing out of a solution like that you're just missing out on a lot of stuff. And we'll go into some more on the whys as well. But it really boils down to, I'm going to make a change in my game. You know, maybe my character needs to have a sword instead of an axe. You know, axes are out, swords are in. It's time to really just do. What did I say? Axes or swords? I don't know. Torches.
Yeah, well, that's why that's the good thing about having source controls. We can just take a look at what we did before, go back and view it there.
Exactly. So when we make that mistake, we need to go back and make him use a sword, an axe, whatever it was.
Okay.
We can just right-click and revert changes, and voila, it's back in.
So anything I did to break the game, I can just hit a button and it goes back to the working state again.
Yeah, and there will be a lot of times when I've been working on teams and somebody will check in some code that he didn't actually test. And yeah, it really breaks it. Or maybe they accidentally deleted a file, you know, maybe a app config file or some sort of certificate that we generated and we do all of our authentication off of, and it's really hard to generate that back again. So what do? Well, if you use Dropbox or you're just passing around a zip file, now you gotta go see who has it, maybe rebuild a hard drive like somebody out there I know. But if you had source control, you can just go view your history and bring it back out into your current version. So it's really important.
Yeah, you know, the way I kind of always looked at it was like those choose your own adventure books where you can choose to go this route or that route and it'll bring you down to another page. And I was one of those people who always kept my thumb on that last page, looked ahead, realized I made a mistake, went down the wrong path. I just flip my page back and I'm back at the right route.
I never thought about it as a choose your own adventure, but it certainly can be an adventure if you don't use source control. Yes. What I say about source control is the rule number one of source control is use source control. Rule number two is to refer to rule number one. And rule number three is to force everybody at your company to also refer to rule number one. It is the most important thing that you can possibly do when developing software. Project management, definitely important, but if you lose your product, I mean, you're just...
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Yeah, you're in big trouble at that point.
Lost time, lost money, maybe an angry boss or some upset coworkers because they may be depending on you too.
Wouldn't know what to tell my investors if I lost the product.
Yeah.
So before we go into more about source control, I want to talk a little bit about some more Unity-specific things. Particularly, how do we integrate Unity with source control? There's two really important things to talk about, and this image will demonstrate that. It's visible meta files. These guys are important. The meta files can strike in all sorts of crazy ways. What it's going to do is it's going to split off the import settings or Unity-specific settings of your prefabs and your scenes and your textures and your assets and things like scaling them up or down from your import, not necessarily the source file, but the import of those assets. So on your disk and in source control, it will exist one way, but in Unity it will exist in a slightly different way based off of how you imported it. And splitting these meta files will allow those import settings to live side by side with those assets. So let's say that I had one developer who decided to change the source asset. He made it twice as big.
Yeah. And
then I had another developer who made it half as small from Unity.
All right.
Well, at the end of the day, it's going to be exactly the same size. So having these visible meta files will be really nice for merging things together. So if I modify a scene and somebody else modifies a scene, or we both modify import settings, we can go and we can see who did what, and it's not stored in the same file. Previously it was in the library folder, I believe.
Okay.
Well, I have a page on that. I always have to refer to it anyways. You guys will probably have to do the same thing too. Here you go. So what do I check in? This is probably one of the most important lists that you can have if you're going to be doing source control.
Yeah.
At your root folder, you're going to have mostly auto-generated stuff, your CS proj files, other kinds of things that you just won't check in. You'll ignore your library folder if you split your meta files. That's going to be a local cache of your assets at this point.
Okay.
Your temp file folder is going to be all temporary stuff. The important things to check in are going to be your assets and your project settings. Your assets are going to be everything that's specific to your game. It's going to be your scenes. It's going to be your
art, your music.
Your code, yeah,
Yep.
Exactly. And your project settings will be your physics and your input settings as well.
So right now it seems like it's all about keeping file size and clutter down to a manageable point.
Yeah, you want to keep all that down, but most importantly, what you check in, you want to make sure that it's something that somebody else on your team can go and they can pull the source control and they can use it. Or say that I'm doing work on my my laptop and it gets run over by a bus.
Okay.
I can go and I can pull that down and be back up and running from another box.
So it sounds like we want to keep it stored locally, but at the same time keep it stored off in a cloud somewhere too.
Yes. And that's kind of where we're going to get to the couple of different options, and this can get into a huge debate.
This is like very much a holy war of
Oh, yes. This is the holy war of version control. It's Git versus TFS. We kind of chose us two to do this presentation because I'm very much a TFS version control. I love centralized control. I think it's easier to understand. They're both fully supported in Visual Studio, but it's really that easy to understand for me that I like. I like the branching model. Yep. I like that it lives in one place on the cloud and it isn't, nobody else can mess with it. It's just there and I can control the permissions the way that I like.
Yep.
And it's just familiar for me.
So it's basically like the large entire project is kept together in one spot.
Yeah, so I'm not very good with the whole Git thing. I tried to look at it once and it just confused me beyond all belief. So I'm going to kind of defer this portion of the conversation to our resident expert over here.
Sure. So Git is an alternative means of source control. It really started growing popularity in the last couple of years with something like GitHub, where people can publicly host and share their files. So the idea behind Git is that you don't need to check out the entire project, but instead just different parts. And along the way, you can add small specific features. So if we're working on our game, I can then make a copy of this project and branch off of my main tree, and I might add a feature like new inputs, so alternative controls for maybe connect. And this way I can make all the changes I want without ever affecting anything in the center, so you guys can continue to build your project, and it works just the same. Then once we've all tested it and make sure it's working okay, I can then send a message back to you to say, hey, this works, I've tried it out, so why don't you push this back into your main project? And it's doing a merge, we'll call it.
Exactly. And in Team Foundation Server version control, what you'll do, if you want to create a feature branch and you have something that you want other people to kind of look at that's separate from the main workflow, you can create a branch, but that branch will live on a central location. So everybody will be working off of the same one. You don't have this idea of a distributed version control like Git is. Git is going to be everybody has their own version of the repository, a full version, but you'll also have a master location.
Yes.
And that's the part that confuses me. I'm not very good with that portion, but you know, it turns into that battle, and we could duke it out forever. But just know that with Team Foundation Server, it's Team Foundation Server, not TFS version control, not Git version control, but you have those two options. They're both fully supported from the UI, and you get a GUI, so you don't have to use the command line tool. So if you liked Git, Team Foundation Server now has some really good tools for you to use from within the GUI. And I believe we'll take a look at that in a little bit. So, you know, one of the next questions that we get is, okay, I've got Team Foundation Server. I've picked my project type. I've picked my version control strategy. Now I need to actually connect to it, and I need to do my actual check-in. So the first thing you really need is you need to go to visualstudio.com. You get for free, you can have up to 5 people using it. And you can kind of rotate who's using it. So as I have people come on and off of my game development projects,
Okay.
I'll remove their permissions and then I'll give it to somebody else. So sometimes, you bring on somebody and they're not really doing anything, and then you can have take away their permissions and allocate that to somebody else.
Okay.
Then you're going to need to download Visual Studio. You can either get Express free or Pro trial. You can get the trial or you can pay. And here's the link for you. We'll make these slides available. I'm not sure when. And then inside of Visual Studio, you'll go to Team, Connect to Team Foundation Server. And then you'll enter the visualstudio.com project URL. And we're going to go ahead and do a quick demo of what version control looks like. So the first thing we're going to take a look at while doing this is the project structure in Unity that we alluded to earlier.
Okay.
So you can see we have these assets, these build process templates. This is something that TFS version control is going to bring into. I am not zooming the way I had wanted to. There we go. Okay, so we've got the assets. The build process templates is something that Team Foundation Server is going to bring into. We're not really going to talk about that a lot today. The library folder, the project settings folder, this TF ignore is pretty essential. This is something that you can use to ignore files. So if we, let's actually take a look at this. We can open this in Notepad.
Yeah, it essentially looks like a text file.
Yeah, it's basically a text file, and it's going to tell you, here's some of the files that I've decided to ignore.
Yep.
So you can see I'm ignoring the temp folder, I'm ignoring the library folder. At the root level, I'm ignoring pretty much every CS proj file. I'm ignoring the solution files. These are all things that are going to get auto-generated. If I check these in, and Mr. Voiles over here decides to pull down the code, he's going to get a lot of stuff that's specific to me and my workflow and my environment. I want him to be able to auto-generate that stuff himself.
Right, because often Unity and Visual Studio will optimize the game based on the specific platform that you're playing it on at that point.
Yeah, but it's going to be more around what kinds of builds I've done. Am I using Unity VS? Have I done specific settings into my Visual Studio? Am I using the light theme? Am I using the dark theme?
Right, preferences.
How did I split my windows up in Unity? I don't really want to force those settings onto Voiles because he has his own workflow.
Yes.
So those are really important things.
And then Git operates the same way with their git ignore file.
Yes, so Git has the same kind of thing. It's instead of tfignore, I believe it's .gitignore or git.ignore or something along those lines. You'll be able to see it in your project structure if you use that. I believe they use a very similar format.
Yep.
So if we take a look at my screen again, you can see what we have actually checked in. We have the assets, the build process templates, which we're not really going to talk about today, and the project settings. So if we expand the assets, you can see I've got audio, I've got editor, which is plugin type stuff. Rise of the Dough is a completely another project. But these are going to be the kinds of things that I check in. And when we connect to the team project, you want to go to Team, this little Team button up here, and go to Connect to Team Foundation Server.
I see it pop up on the right-hand side there.
Exactly. So you'll get what's called the Team Explorer. If you're using Visual Studio Express, this is kind of your main living point for doing any of your version control. When you come into this fresh, you won't have already connected. You'll see this little plug button. It says Connect to Team Projects. You can click that, or you can do Select Team Projects. If you click Select Team Projects, right now I'm connected to it already, and I have it in here. If you don't have this, you click Servers, and you can select Add. So what it's going to be is the name of your instance that you did. Mine is Gero, Gero.visualstudio.com. So you'll type whatever the name of your project is, or your project collection, .visualstudio.com. And once you add that, you can get access to it, and you can see I've got my Impact, Day of Unity stuff, Project Gero, Jack Round, and some stuff that I just test on. And we're working on Project Jack Round, so I click the checkbox, I click Connect. We're already connected to it. And once I do that, I can click this here and add items to folder. This is going to be the important part. If you're doing an initial check-in, you'll do add items to folder.
Okay.
And you'll go and find the different items to folder. It'll show you everything that's in that folder as it is. You can do your assets, and then you're going to do your project settings, and you're going to ignore everything else. And then you'll do your initial check-in.
So you're now taking everything that's stored locally on your machine and you're pushing it to the cloud so that someone else can grab it at a later time.
Exactly. And actually, to demonstrate this, we put, I've already checked it in, and we deleted everything off of Mr. Dave Voil's box. So what we want to do is show the actual pulling of that and show the project actually running on that box. And we haven't really tested this too well, so we're kind of crossing our fingers that it works out live. So let's flip over to Mr. Voil's and see how it goes. Do you want to do a pool for us?
Sure. Right now, we can see I'm in Visual Studio. I have my Team Explorer over here on the right-hand side. And you can see I have Jiro.visualstudio.com, and I'm currently connected to the Jack Round project.
One thing to also note is if you look at his local path, right now we've mapped it at least. It'll say not mapped if you haven't mapped it before. You click on that link and you select the folder that you want to map the project to locally. Pathing in Windows limits to 254 characters, so I like to put things at C:\project, something very simple and very short.
Right. So right here we have local path, like Dave mentioned, currently mapped. But if I go to that folder itself, I can open it up and I can see there's nothing in there at this point. However, I can look online and I see at our source repo, I have an assets folder, build process, project settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these things, which I can see he last put in on the 25th, and I'm then going to pull them down and put them in my folder. So right here, I right-click on Jack Round, and then Get Latest Version. It's going to pull down any changes, and you're going to see it update right here. So it's downloading everything, and I can see.
Yeah, let's switch over to the File Explorer and see how that's looking.
So let's see how this File Explorer looks.
And it's starting to pull down all the assets, project process templates, and even the tf-ignore file. That's a really good one to make sure it's checked in. It gets checked in automatically, but if you notice that that's not getting checked in, that's something that needs to make sure that you're there so other people aren't checking in garbage.
Right. So from here, I can take the project he has just worked on, go to Scenes, Level 1. It's going to load up Unity.
And what it's doing now is it's building the local cache of those assets in accordance to the meta file. So that could take some time. This is a fairly small 2D platformer project that we built, really, really quickly. So it should load everything, well, pretty quickly.
And you can see I took that whole project that was on his machine. He then pushed it to the cloud. I can press play. And here we go. We have our project.
Yeah, let's maximize that. And to talk about some of the things for Mr. Matthew, just do it. This is all paint.net. Made sure I just did something that was really simple. It's really buggy, but if you have a poor art style and it's all kind of together collectively, it can actually look kind of good and kind of mobile-ish.
And look, there's that slow button we were talking about before in effect. I can unslow and then slow.
Yep, so I did implement that, I guess. So I should probably log that in my features.
Yeah. So it shows you how easy it is for David to save a project, push it to the cloud, and then I can pull then any changes that he immediately makes right there.
Exactly. So now we've talked about doing project management. We've talked about source control. I think one of the next more important things to talk about is going to be workflow. This is huge. You want to make sure that your teams are doing things in a way that makes sense, that they're not stepping on each other's toes. And how do you actually go about doing that? And some of these are going to be Unity specific. Some of these can be applied across the board to different organizations. If you're building software, you need to follow some sort of process management and workflow when you're actually developing your product. So for Unity specifically, we want to look at my slide deck and say, be wary of the binary assets. So there's something that you can do to make sure that they're not necessarily binary. You can go to that same setting where we set the meta files to be visible. You can force text on them. That will allow them to be mergeable, but it's still very, very difficult. So sometimes it's nice to force binary just so that somebody, when they try and check it in, they see the conflict and they're like, oh God, I should never do that again.
Right.
So scenes, prefabs, those are some of the things that you do that for. When you actually do work, you want to pull your changes first. You're going to want to do work. Then I like to pull my changes again, merge the conflicts, test, and check in. So if I'm working on a file, chances are that somebody else on the team might be working on the same file. They might be working on the same scene. You know?
Right.
Maybe we're trying to test out the axe versus the sword. So Dave opens up a scene, level 1, and I open up level 1, and we decide I'm going to give the character a sword, and Voiles gives the character an axe. So I pull in all the changes, I do some work, and Voiles does some work too. Let's say Voiles is a lot faster at doing work than I am. So he goes ahead, he pulls changes, sees nothing wrong has happened. He merges any of the conflicts, there weren't any, tests it, works great, checks it in.
Perfect.
So I'm, however, at this second portion where I'm doing work. So I've done work, I've done stuff with a sword instead of an axe, and I pull changes again, and I get a lot of conflicts. I get scene conflicts, I get code conflicts.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we had an interface for what a weapon actually is. And during Dave's testing, he found out that, hey, we need to change this interface because we need to make sure that all weapons have handles. You know, all weapons have handles. And maybe all weapons can be thrown, too. So, yeah, you got to have throwable weapons.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I pull those changes, I didn't think all weapons should be thrown. So I see in this list of changes that Dave said, oh, all weapons should be thrown. So I merge those conflicts, and when I test, I find out that my sword doesn't actually implement that interface. So if I check that in, I would break everybody's build across the entire team. So yeah, you can't break the build. We have alarms that go off in some of our teams where if you break the build, everybody's coming down to your office and putting funny cardboard cutouts.
Looks like you're buying dinner tonight.
Exactly. So you need to make sure you test after merging those conflicts. I can't stress enough. People get really angry about when you break the build, and rightly so. That can really mess up a lot of things for other people. You have a huge code base. You mess up one thing and the code doesn't compile. All of a sudden, your team can't do work. So if you're working in a global environment and I'm checking out at 5 o'clock, I check in my code, I go home and I'm taking care of the kids, I'm eating dinner, I'm doing whatever I do during my home life, and my global team in a different time zone comes in the morning to do more work, then the code's broken. What are they going to do? They have to wait for me to come back the next day. That's an entire day lost, a code break, or they have to go and analyze that code themselves. And you can have the same issue with assets. So definitely pull changes, do work, pull changes again, merge conflicts, test, check in. The reason I like to do pull changes again, just like I said, is you never know what happened in the middle of doing work. You could infinitely pull changes, but merging conflicts takes a lot less time than doing work. So that's kind of why I like to pull changes, do work, pull changes again, merge conflicts, test, check in. I'm going to say that a lot.
Yeah. Almost want to print it out and put it on our board as we're working.
Exactly. Conflict resolution. So we kind of talked about this a little bit. We'll throw the slide up. Binary assets cannot be resolved cleanly. It's not a text file. It's a bunch of bits, and your merge tools don't know what to do with this. You know, and it says, I don't know what this means versus this. But if it's serialized in a XML type format or a text format, then all of a sudden you have something where you can take a look at it. So in scenes, the order of your objects in a scene doesn't necessarily matter. So you can take a look at it with a merge tool, and you can see, oh, Voiles just added an axe, and I just added a sword, and they're both not marked active. So we can say, okay, it's fair enough to keep both those objects in there attached to the character. That's perfectly happy. So we're fine to go ahead and merge that. The meta files, if you don't split those off, you're going to have issues in your library folder. So make sure that you split those off. We can take a look at it and we can see that, oh, we both modified the import settings. You know, Voiles said 75%, I said 50%. Well, now we can go and have a meeting during our stand-up, take a look at the board and say, hey, we really need to mark this at 60%. And then we can also talk about, should we modify the source asset or should we modify the import settings? What's the advantages and disadvantages of doing it either way? So really important stuff to make sure you split that off. So having these things serializable opens the opportunity for more discussion with your project.
Okay.
So again, the meta file, I mean, I can't stress this enough. This really should be mandatory to split this guy off. Let's assume asset 1, we just talked about this. Asset 1, source doubled in size by person 1, asset 1 halved inside, merge conflict in library. If you take the meta file from person 1, the asset is doubled in size. If you take it from person 2, asset remains the same size.
Okay.
So, one thing to be aware of. And metafile strikes again, number 2. So scene 1 created by person 1, scene 2 modifications by person 2. If you don't split the metafile off, all of those are going to be stored in the same file in your library, and it's going to all be binary. You have no idea what you're actually doing. So you need to make sure you split those off so this doesn't happen to you. I was working on a 48-hour game jam, and one of my guys was building the title scene, and I was working on level 1. It was actually this project. This came out of a game jam. And, in 48 hours, you're not thinking, I need to split the metafiles off. And we didn't. So what happened was at the end of the game jam, we went to merge our stuff together. And we broke the entire project, and we didn't make our entry on time. So, lesson learned again, even on small 48-hour events where you're just trying to crank stuff out, I can't stress how important that is. The other important thing, excluded changes. You're going to go and you're going to add a bunch of stuff, and it's not going to get picked up like you do on normal projects. You're not adding it to the project file. TFS works really well with standard .NET C# type projects, so it checks that .cs proj file. So you're going to see at the bottom when you perform a check-in that there might be detected 1,265 adds and 2 deletes. I'm pretty sure you can imagine what would happen to the project if I forgot to add those 1,265 adds. Somebody's not going to get whatever plugin I just installed. That looks pretty familiar of a plugin. You check in plugins, you're going to get a lot of adds and maybe a few deletes to tweak some things. So make sure that you go through those adds and you ignore the files that you need to ignore, and you can do all that straight from there. So you can right-click the file that needs to be ignored and ignore it. And then again, here's the plugin I checked in, Smooth Moves. We decided instead of rolling our own animation system, we'll buy one this time.
Okay.
So it doesn't check in DLLs automatically. So you'll have to go and manually add those like we did with the initial check-in. So if you forget to do that, somebody's going to download the code, and that's not going to be there. So make sure you go through and look for any sort of binaries that get added to your project, especially from plugins from the asset store. And that's about all I've got for this. We're a little over time, sorry about that. But we're going to take a meal break and be back in an hour. I really hope you enjoyed this section on ALM, there we go. Yeah, I kind of got brain dead there for a minute.
You can tell it's lunchtime already.
It's lunchtime. I need to get some coffee and some food, so I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, I'm David Crook. You can follow me at David Crook 1988 on Twitter. And again, this is Voiles.
I'm Dave Voiles. You can find me on Dave Voiles on Twitter. My name is my Twitter handle.
And thanks.
We'll see you in an hour.